One of the biggest issues that I come across as a landlord attorney, or just in general having dealt with the law for quite a bit of time, is holding vendors accountable. And I found there's a few things that a customer can do to hold a vendor accountable that makes it far less contentious and is able to help customers weed out vendors much faster to avoid, delays in work getting done, or to avoid being stuck with a vendor that you don't like ongoing for, probably a very critical project. One of the first things is when you have a contract and you're negotiating it, and maybe it's a vendor that you anticipate using ongoing, maybe you have a lot of work for them for different projects, is, if they have references, it doesn't hurt to check references. As silly as that sounds, calling someone, go, hey, have you worked with this vendor before? And, getting feedback from them, that helps check them out. If they don't have references, they don't have people that are willing to, to vouch for them, that may or may not be a red flag for you. Another thing is, once you get to the point of the contract, it is really, really important to have a very clear and concise contract. And the contract should very clearly specify what the scope of the work is, what the deadlines are, the milestones, so to speak, what the quality standards are, the workmanship that's expected, and the payments, what the milestones are and the payments for those milestones, and then the penalties for non-compliance. And I have found when you're doing the payments, you want to make sure that one of the largest payments is the last one. If you're paying huge payments up front, at the end, if it's like, a few $1,000s on, a very big project, the vendor is more likely to just walk off of a project because they've gotten the bulk of the money per the contract terms. So for contracts, if you're going to have, payments that are tied to milestones, you want the biggest payment or bigger payments towards the end to make sure that the vendor's seeing the project through. I have noticed that has helped my clients have their vendors stay accountable and stay on task. And then having penalties for non-compliance. So if you're late, if you miss the milestone, potentially having penalties for that. Now, those are trickier, especially let's say in construction, because maybe it's out of the control of the vendor. Maybe it has to do with they have a bad inspector. It's not their fault. But looking into penalties for non-compliance is something that you might want to consider. Another one is regular communication. So when you have a project, and this is pretty common in construction things, you want to have an open line of communication with the vendor. You don't want to hound the vendor, but you definitely want to be able to talk to the vendor about the progress going on, address any concerns. Maybe there's some sort of change order, and changes in the field happen all the time. A lot of people want to avoid them. Sometimes they're unavoidable. So it's good to have those communications with them. And part of having those communications, it might be having regular meetings with them or progress meetings with them. So a good rule of thumb before issuing out a check to the vendor is to make sure that you go and you verify the work is done. And I've had clients who are very, very trusting, which, there's goods of that, but the vendor tells them, we did this thing, the milestone's done, and they get, the client gets no proof of it, gets no video, gets no photo, or doesn't go and verify in person. And they've written a ton of checks, they made a lot of payments, and they eventually come around to the job site and they realize oh, none of this was done. None of this was done right, or all of these things are wrong. So you want to make sure that before you're handing over a check on something, you want to make sure that the progress is actually being made, the milestone has actually been reached. That is huge. So not only is communicating huge, having progress documented, meeting notes, emails, text, photos, video, but also making sure that you are verifying that the stuff is getting done and that you're seeing it with your own two eyes, or that you have a trusted confidant seeing it themselves and going, yes, this was actually done. And it also helps you assure that, it's getting done the way that you want it done and the quality that it's supposed to be done at. So those, again, a lot of people are very trusting and don't do it. You've got to make sure that you're checking the progress. Documenting things, in writing when you can. Photos, videos are good to document the progress of what's being done. You don't want to document to the extent that you're harassing the vendor or that you're trying to intimidate them. You don't really need to do that. You just want to document and make sure that things are getting done. And if they're not being responsive or they're being evasive, that's a red flag. Feedback loops also help. So being able to provide constructive criticism to your vendor, or telling them, hey, you're doing this and I don't like it, can you do this, or I prefer it this way. If this is going to be a vendor that you're going to be using long term, it's good that you give them that feedback. And maybe it's a little nitpicky, but you're able to kind of build a rapport with the vendor, and the vendor has an idea of what to expect. So if there's going to be ongoing work for different projects, they have an idea of what you want and what you expect. Otherwise, they're just going to go about it the way they're going to go about it, and the way that they like it or they see fit, and it might not match what you want. So again, going in the field and seeing things and going, hey, I don't like that. Doing it on the first go with the vendor more frequently helps, because then you can see how they work and what the end result's going to look like, their craftsmanship. And then you can kind of critique it and curb it there and go, hey, I don't like that. Can you do it? Like, I prefer this. And a lot of times they'll accommodate it, and then they'll know, going forward. And so then the first job, the first few jobs, being able to have that feedback loop and saying, I like it this way, will save you and the vendor a lot of headaches. Because the vendor probably could have done it, but if they don't know what you want, or what you want is, slightly deviated from like what's standard for that project, it's going to aggravate you, and it's going to aggravate them because they probably could have accommodated it, but they had no idea you wanted something different. And then if you have some sort of ongoing contract with a vendor, it doesn't hurt to revisit it every once in a while. Review the contract, see what it is, and maybe revisit the pricing. Maybe you started out with, one contract, but maybe you don't need that service as much as you needed it before. Maybe things have changed. This is probably common with like landscaping. Maybe you have now like a new drought tolerant landscaping plan that doesn't require as much maintenance from a landscaper. Maybe you go back and revisit the number of times that they frequent the property, things like that. But the very worst and last thing, which is people like myself, lawyers come in, is the legal recourse. So there's different ways that you can do that in a contract. You can try to, mitigate costs by having some sort of mediation agreement in place, or maybe an arbitration agreement. I don't particularly love arbitration, but I'm not going to get into that in this video. That's, kind of a bigger video topic that I may or may not ever do a video on. I don't know if anyone wants to see that. But having, the contract, here's what's going to happen. And why it's really important that you go and you check job progress is early on, if you can figure out like this vendor's not cutting it. Like, they're not doing what they need to be doing. Maybe they don't have a big enough crew. Maybe their quality's just not there. Maybe they're just not that responsible. You're able to cut it much earlier and go, hey, I'll pay you for what's been done, and you cut them loose and you save yourself time, money, aggravation, and probably legal fees. The longer that a vendor is on a job doing poor quality work, sometimes the harder it is and the more expensive it is, because again, if you have a contract where the bigger payment's at the end and you have all of these milestones, then you come to the job site eventually and you go, whoa, this is not what I wanted, and there's a huge payment at the end that this vendor's expecting, that's where it's going to get heated. That's where the legal thing comes in. So definitely just having an attorney that familiar with contracts is good to have, but also just trying to mitigate having to go that route is upfront being very good about meeting and understanding your contract. It's the same kind of concept that you have where they an employment where you hire fast or fire fast, I think is what they say. When you hire someone, fire quickly if they're not doing the job. So if you hire a vendor and they're just not doing the job well, and they're not showing like they're going to be able to pull it off, maybe you have that conversation like, hey, this is not working out between the two of us. Let's just go our separate ways, so that you can avoid the legal expense. The longer things go on and they're going on and you're not satisfied with it, and more money is being owed and due based on the contract, the more expense it's going to be for you to fight it legally. And they're expensive. But again, having a contract that outlines what the recourse is going to be legally also kind of helps avoid that too, or can mitigate the expense of that. Mediation tends to help a lot with mitigating the cost of litigation or, disputes. So those are just some of the things that you should consider when you're holding vendors accountable, or when you're going into the process of negotiating a contract with the vendor that maybe you're new to or you never met. Those should be kind of key principles or rules of thumb that you take into consideration to really, really help not aggravate you as the customer. I hope that you found that very helpful. I also did another video related to the difference between handymen and vendors. That's more of a property management video, and what are good uses for one or the other based on what work needs to be done. So I will link that at the top. You might want to check that out. I also have a weekly newsletter that I send that's predominantly for landlords, but it has a lot of really good general rule of thumb information that I give. So you might want to subscribe to that. I'll link that below. It's free, and I am very proud of it. Other than that, thank you for stopping by, checking out this video, and I will see you in the next one.